A raw, bloody slab of meat sits on a cold stone. There is no smoke in the air. There is no smell of roasting fat or seasoned crust. Only the heavy, metallic scent of iron and the rhythmic sound of teeth grinding against bone. 2 million years ago, dinner wasn't a cozy choice. It was a brutal, jaw-breaking test of survival. Most of us struggle to enjoy a meal if the Wi-Fi is slow or the steak is slightly overcooked. But for millions of years, our ancestors existed in a world where the very idea of cooking didn't exist. They were the ultimate raw foodists, but not by choice. So how did they actually survive on a menu of raw meat, dirt-covered roots, and crunchy insects without a single spark of fire? The first thing to understand is that we weren't always the kings of the jungle. Before fire, we weren't the ones doing the terrifying hunting. We were the ones waiting in the shadows. We were the world's most elite scavengers. While a saber-toothed cat or a giant hyena was busy taking down a gazelle, our ancestors were lurking nearby, clutching a heavy river stone. They weren't looking for the prime cuts of meat. They were looking for the stuff no one else could get to, the marrow. This is where the Oldowan toolkit changed everything. These weren't fancy swords. They were just rocks smashed together to create a sharp edge. But they were the high-tech of the Pliocene. While other animals walked away from a carcass because they couldn't get through the thick leg bones or the heavy skull, we stepped in. We used those stones to crack open the bones like an egg to reach the fatty, calorie-dense marrow and brain tissue inside. It was the most concentrated energy source in nature. Honestly, I struggle to open a stubborn jar of pickles without a specialized rubber grip. Yet these people were performing precision surgery on bison skulls with a piece of granite. It was the original brain food, and it's the reason we had the energy to grow these massive, complex minds in the first place. But meat was a luxury. Most of the day was spent in what can only be described as the great dental grind. Without fire to soften fibers, eating a plant was a full-time job. Our ancestors relied heavily on USOs, underground storage organs, which is just a fancy scientific way of saying roots and tubers. Imagine trying to eat a raw, unpeeled sweet potato that's been sitting in the sun for 3 days. It's not just hard, it's like chewing on a leather boot. Did it taste good? No. Was it exhausting? Absolutely. Researchers estimate that before fire, our ancestors spent up to 6 hours a day just masticating. That is 6 hours of intense jaw exercise just to get enough calories to survive. Their teeth were like biological millstones, wearing down under the constant pressure of grit and fiber. Every meal was a workout. If we had to chew our salads for 6 hours today, the entire fast food industry would collapse in a week. We've traded those massive, powerful jaws for the ability to eat a soft burger in 30 seconds. But back then, your jaw was your most important survival tool. When the roots were too tough and the carcasses were empty, they turned to the protein pocket. In the modern world, we see a termite mound and call an exterminator. 2 million years ago, that mound was a 5-star buffet. Insects, larvae, and caterpillars were the ultimate survival snacks. They are packed with protein, loaded with healthy fats, and they don't fight back. Well, most of them don't. Our ancestors would spend hours harvesting termites with a simple stick or raiding a bird's nest for raw eggs. It wasn't glamorous, but it was efficient. Insects provide a higher percentage of protein per pound than beef. They were the original protein bar of the savannah. We might find the idea of eating a handful of crunchy crickets disturbing, but to a hungry hominid, that was the difference between life and death. They were looking for any caloric advantage they could find. They were explorers of the edible, testing every berry, every nut, and every crawling thing to see if it would keep them going for 1 more mile. How do we know all of this? The evidence is literally stuck in their teeth. Scientists have analyzed fossilized dental plaque, the black box of ancient history. Inside that hardened tartar, they found microscopic fragments of raw starch, plant tissues, and even muscle fibers. This confirms that long before the first hearth was ever lit, we were already eating a complex, omnivorous diet. We were eating raw grasses, wild fruits, and starchy bulbs. We were generalists. While other animals were locked into eating just one thing, we were eating everything. That flexibility is the reason we survived, while so many other species vanished. The energy we got from these raw fruits and seeds was like a natural sugar rush. Wild fruits back then weren't the oversized, hyper-sweet versions we see at a modern grocery store. They were small, tart, and often mostly seeds. But they provided a quick burst of glucose. It was the fuel they needed to outrun a predator or hike 10 miles to the next watering hole. They didn't have Wall Street or a 401k, but they understood the value of an immediate return on investment. If a bush had berries, they ate every single one. There was no saving for later in a world where a bear might steal your leftovers. Living this way required a deep, intimate knowledge of the environment. They had to know which roots were poisonous and which ones would save them during a drought. They had to understand the migration patterns of the animals they scavenged from. They were living in a constant state of observation. They were the original biologists, learning the secrets of the earth through trial, error, and a lot of stomach aches. There was a profound vulnerability to this lifestyle. Without fire to kill parasites or break down toxins, every meal was a risk. They had to have incredibly tough digestive systems and powerful immune responses. We often romanticize the paleo diet, but the reality was a constant battle against bacteria and tough, indigestible cellulose. We have become a species that is biologically dependent on cooking. Our guts have shrunk and our brains have grown because fire does the digestion for us outside of the body. But before that spark, we were doing it all internally, through sheer physical force and a lot of spit. This total reliance on the raw world meant that the group was everything. You couldn't survive the dental grind alone. You needed eyes watching your back while you were busy chewing. You needed a tribe to share the news of a fresh carcass or a hidden patch of tubers. Food wasn't just calories. It was the reason for the community. The act of sharing a raw piece of marrow was the beginning of human cooperation. It was the first time we realized that if I help you eat today, you might help me survive tomorrow. Looking back at those ancient meals, it is easy to focus on how gross or hard it seems. But there is a silent strength in that history. When the last light faded and there was no fire to keep the cold away, our ancestors sat in the dark, chewing on tough roots and raw meat, and they didn't quit. They didn't have the comforts of a kitchen or the safety of a fenced-in yard, but they had a resilience that is almost impossible to grasp. They took the most basic, raw materials of the earth and turned them into the fuel for the most successful species in history. So, after everything we've discovered, what was it really like to eat before the flames? The answer isn't just a menu of raw meat and insects. It's the acknowledgement of a primal endurance that defines who we are. It is the story of a species that refused to starve, a species that found a way to unlock the energy of the world using nothing but stones and their own grit. We are the descendants of the ultimate survivors, the ones who could find a feast in a pile of bones and a miracle in a handful of seeds. When the shadows of the prehistoric night closed in, those ancient humans understood something we often forget. They knew that survival isn't about being the strongest or the fastest, it's about being the most adaptable. They survived the raw world so that we could eventually build a cooked one. The next time you find yourself complaining about a cold meal, remember the millions of years of silence and raw survival that came before you. We have traded the crushing dental work for the comfort of the flame, but that ancient, raw hunger still lives deep in our history. We finally moved past the era of the stone hammer and the raw root, but the story of how we made it through the dark remains etched into every tooth we have. Honestly, I'm just glad I can use a microwave now. It's a lot easier on the jaw than spending 6 hours a day chewing on a wild tuber. We've come a long way from the scavenger's pile, but we're still just trying to find enough energy to make it to the next sunrise.